My name is Eleonora and I'm a first-time mom to a beautiful 6-month-old baby girl, and I love to share my experiences about motherhood. And today we are talking all about breastfeeding. I have been exclusively breastfeeding since baby girl was born, and there are definitely things that I wish I had known before actually starting to. Now, just a quick disclaimer, I am not a medical professional, I am not a lactation consultant, I am just a mama that figured things out, did extensive research that I'm sharing. I'm not giving any medical advice or any advice for that matter. Before I started breastfeeding, before I gave birth, I really do wish that I had looked into breastfeeding a little bit more than I did. I was going to read Ina May's book on breastfeeding, but I did know that there was stories in that book that share experiences of women where breastfeeding didn't work out, and I'm kind of a hypochondriac in that sense. I didn't want to read something and then convince myself that I have some sort of issue based on what I read. So I knew absolutely nothing when I started breastfeeding. Kind of was just expecting to latch baby and for everything to just go the way that it's supposed to. Didn't really have any backup, probably should have, but in hindsight, I'm actually proud of myself because throughout my pregnancy, I really was trying to trust myself, my body, my baby, and that was just another thing that I can do to allow that. But still, the basics probably would have been very helpful, so I'll be sharing everything that I wish I knew. Breastfeeding 101, super basics. Now, before your actual milk comes in, your body does produce something called colostrum. It's a high-calorie liquid that is really filled with nutrients. It's liquid gold. Some women are even able to pump some colostrum before they even give birth. It's not technically recommended because it can potentially induce labor. Now, I don't actually know when my milk came in, and this is where I wish I knew a little bit more. For some reason, I was under the impression that colostrum was clear, not yellow. And I wasn't really aware that the first milk that had come out, that really, really yellow liquid gold, was actually colostrum. If I had known, I probably would have been more adamant about giving that to baby girl and not freezing it. But whenever something came in, it came fast. So 3 days after I gave birth is when I became severely engorged. And I had a lot of milk, or in this case it was colostrum because it was yellow. And it was about 2 to 3 days after that that I had milk that was actually white. But anyway, I got so engorged so quickly that I just didn't know what to do with myself. I genuinely felt like my breasts will explode. Now, mainstream advice does say to pump to relieve engorgement. However, because you're in that period postpartum, of those first 12 weeks is really when your supply regulates. So if you start pumping during those first 12 weeks, there is the potential of your body producing more than needed. So you become an oversupplier. My midwife, thankfully, is also a lactation consultant. So she was able to guide me through those first couple of weeks, which was so helpful. So she highly advised against pumping in any capacity because of that supply and demand issue. You know, it would give me temporary relief, but it would possibly create issues in the future. The more you empty your breasts, the more your body will make milk because it's thinking that it needs it for the baby. A few things that she suggested to do, she did send me a video of how to manually express milk, kind of like in a massage way. I'll try to find the video and link it below. Other things you can do is stand under a warm shower, lymphatic drainage massage. I found mixed things on cold compresses and warm compresses. Some say you can do warm before and cold after you feed, but because my milk came in so fast and I was so engorged, and my husband even did try to help massage it out, but it was just so incredibly painful, I did decide to use a pump just for minimal relief, just to get some kind of relief. I didn't do it to empty, and thankfully that helped a lot. Other things that I did when I was nursing baby girl, I made sure to massage my breast so that she would be able to get more milk in a session, in a feed, to kind of help that relief as well. Now, with latching is super important with breastfeeding. The latch is kind of what determines your experience, I think. And when baby is first born, you want to latch them as soon as possible. So I checked my timestamps, and I apparently latched baby girl about 10 minutes after she was born. She was still connected to the cord, and I had not birthed my placenta yet. And this is kind of cool. So breastfeeding actually helps contract your uterus, and because I was breastfeeding her right when she was born, those hormone triggers essentially activated my uterus to push out my placenta. But that's also where postpartum cramping can come in. I didn't have it that bad, thankfully, but I did have pain potion and ease the ache from Earthly on hand. I did use that a number of times for that cramping, but breastfeeding really helps that process of that contraction and having your body expel everything it doesn't need after you give birth. So The way that the female body is made is just incredible. And honestly, I got so lucky that she just knew what she was doing. She knew how to latch. I had no idea what a proper latch even was. I just put her on the breast and my midwife was helping give me advice on what to do. A great tip that she told me actually to teach baby to have the proper latch is to run your nipple across the baby's nose, lip, and chin so that they open up really wide. And you want as much of the breast in the mouth as possible. It's breastfeeding, not nipple feeding. So, and although she latched pretty quickly, newborns are a bit weaker with suction because they're just brand new human beings. She was really sleepy newborn. She would fall asleep nursing all the time. And of course, I was terrified of her not getting enough. So in the beginning, you don't want your baby to lose more than 10 to 15 pounds after birth weight, of their birth weight. I think she lost around 13%. So in the first 24 hours, she actually barely lost anything. And thankfully my midwife came 24 hours after I gave birth and checked in on us. I don't know how many times I could say this. I didn't know what I was doing. And baby girl, in those first 24 hours, even though I was supposed to latch her much more frequently than I was, she, I guess, had a good reserve and didn't lose too much. I think in the next 24, that's when she lost the 13%. So I didn't want her to keep losing. I was really afraid of that. And we decided to syringe feed her just a few times. I think we did it maybe 3 or 4 times. And this is one of those instances that I pumped. Aside from relieving engorgement, I did pump a few times for this specific reason. I used the S1 Spectra and I got it through insurance. It's a good pump. They recommended that to me and that's just the one that I got. It is kind of a pain that it wasn't hands-free. I know that they have bras that kind of hold it for you. I wasn't planning on pumping too much, so I never got that bra. So I pumped just a little bit, put it into a syringe, and then my husband would put the syringe in her mouth and slowly release the milk. Now, while he was doing this, I made sure to have very short nails, clean hands, and I put my pinky on the roof of her mouth so that she has some sort of suction. Now, newborn babies have a tongue thrust reflex where they push things out with their mouth. They don't really swallow without having some sort of suction. So she needed that suction to be able to swallow something. So we did that a few times with the syringe, but just made sure to do it slowly so that she wouldn't expect to have milk come out that fast from her breasts. I think that's where nipple confusion can come in when you're breastfeeding and bottle feeding. That was a whole big thing in my research as well. If you are doing breastfeeding and bottle feeding, there's something called paced feeding where you're trying to have the baby work a little harder so that they don't start preferring the bottle over to breast if you are doing both. Breastfeeding is so crazy. When you're strictly feeding at the breast, you have no idea how much you are feeding your baby. Even if you are pumping, that does not mean that that's how much your baby is getting. Baby suction is usually stronger than a pump. They can get more out of the breast than a pump can. So even if you're pumping, you still have no idea how much your baby is actually getting. And talk about postpartum anxiety, making sure that your baby is eating enough and gaining weight. My midwife did say as well that as long as baby is gaining weight, having plenty of wet diapers and poop diapers, they're getting enough. So I had every intention of introducing bottles to baby girl at some point because I was under the impression that that would give me a break. Let's say if it's in the middle of the night and I want to get an extra stretch of sleep, my husband can feed her. However, I did not realize that even though you're not feeding baby at the breast, you would still need to be pumping during that feed, especially while you are trying to regulate your supply. So if I wanted my husband to help and give her a bottle, I would still have to wake up in the middle of the night and pump because you still need to be releasing milk to be able to regulate that supply. And pumping is a lot of work, honestly. For all you mamas that have to pump and choose to pump, that is a lot of work. You have pump parts, you have bottles to wash. There's just so much to it. I was like, let me just continue to feed her at the breast. It's working for us. And I didn't enjoy pumping to begin with. It wasn't something that was enjoyable to me. I actually enjoy breastfeeding much more. I love nursing my baby girl. And it really, as much as I might have complained about it in the beginning, it's been a beautiful experience. But anyway, it defeated the purpose for me to have that break. So I just continued to nurse her specifically and only at the breast. Now, when it came time for the actual feeding session, I never really switched between breasts in a feeding. I always stayed at one breast for the entire duration. Now, when a baby first latches, there's technically 2 parts to your milk. You have the foremilk, which is kind of the hydration for your baby, and then you have the hind milk, which is where all the fat is and all that satiating goodness. So I tried to keep her on one side for as long as possible, just so that she would get all of it. Let's get into more about what happens when you're feeding. When baby starts to suckle, your body releases oxytocin, and that signals your brain to release the milk. I didn't know this. I was under the impression that milk comes out of one breast at a time. Apparently though, when that hormone is released, milk comes out of both of your breasts. So I do still wear a pad while I'm nursing on the side that she's not nursing on because of that letdown. Even after the 12 weeks when your supply regulates, it still comes out on the other one. So I don't know if that ever goes away. I hope it does, but right now at 6 months, it's still doing that. And even though I didn't pump to feed baby girl, I did occasionally use a haka and a boon. So these aren't necessarily pumps, they're more of like a suction. It's still considered that you're taking extra out because of that suction. It's not just of what's pouring out, but I use that a lot in the beginning to help relieve some pressure on the other side because of the engorgement and without having to really pump and take it out. And then I would just use that milk for baths, for her skin. I would freeze some. And then recently I have been putting it into like that little feeder. You can freeze it and then you put it into the feeder. And that's really great for when she's teething. And then I do plan to continue to do the haka and the boon when she starts solid, so I can use that for kind of thinning out some foods and just so she has some familiarity with that. I did like the boon a little better. It was a bit stronger, which I thought was taking away from her in the beginning, but it wasn't. But the haka is just kind of awkwardly placed, and if your baby moves, very common that it can be knocked off and then the milk goes everywhere. The boon is just a little more comfortable just to kind of put in your bra, and you don't have to worry about it spilling or anything like that. And now mainstream advice is that babies need to eat every 2 to 3 hours, regardless if they are breastfed or formula fed. Whether or not this is true, this fact stressed me out so much in the beginning. I had a very sleepy newborn. According to all these experts, they were pretty much saying that you do have to wake your baby to feed them every 2 to 3 hours. Otherwise, they are not going to get back to birth weight, or they're not eating enough, or just bad things can happen. You're supposed to feed every 2 to 3 hours technically until they reach birth weight or until 12 weeks to regulate your supply. It was a lot of information and it was very overwhelming. We actually one time woke her up. She had slept a 6-hour stretch and I was leaking like crazy, and I was like, well, this is 6 hours. It's way too long. Like, this is a problem. And I started freaking out. So we did wake her up, and it was a big mistake. We did not do that anymore. It was so hard to get her back down. I don't even remember if she latched by us waking her because she was cranky. She was sleeping and we woke her up, which is another thing. I thought you weren't supposed to wake up a sleeping baby. And now they were saying, wake up your sleeping baby. And looking back, I do wish I just would have listened to my intuition a little bit more. I did recently also read that the whole 2 to 3 hours came from a hospital, like in the 1900s. That's how nurses were responsible for hundreds of babies. And that was just kind of the time that doctors had found to be optimal in terms of, you know, whether holding them or feeding them. That was just the optimal time. I am a first-time mom. I am home with my baby, and that really should not have applied to me. And then I recently saw a graphic, I will try to find it, I think I screenshotted it, of what it looks like when you are breastfeeding on demand. And that is not going to look like every 2 to 3 hours. That is going to look either more frequently or less frequently depending on your baby. And it really was eye-opening. And then there's the whole cluster feeding situation of when you're cluster feeding, you're feeding maybe what feels like every hour. To me, I think I felt like I was cluster feeding for the first 3 months. I was just latching her as often as she wanted to. Babies don't only nurse for food, they nurse for comfort, security, for when they're having their growth spurts. There's so many other reasons that you nurse besides actual nutrition. Breast milk also has components that help babies sleep, and in the beginning with everything I was reading, it was saying absolutely do not nurse your baby to sleep. Do not feed them to sleep. You're creating a bad habit. You're doing this, you're doing that. When she was actually going through her sleep regression and I had really hard time putting her down to nap, she didn't want to nurse to sleep, I realized how much of a superpower nursing to sleep actually is, and I will absolutely take advantage of that for as long as possible, for as long as needed. There is no right way to do this, honestly. It's whatever works for your family and whatever works for your body and your baby. Now, the leaking, those first 3 months, I was a dripping faucet. I had disposable nursing pads that I got from my registry. I did use all of them up, but they honestly weren't thick enough because I was leaking so bad. And funny enough, in the beginning when I first gave birth, I wasn't wearing a bra because I didn't have actual nursing bras that felt comfortable because I was so engorged. So at night, I just slept on a towel and I would wake up just completely drenched, either from postpartum sweating all night or from leaking so much. So what I did eventually get once I ran out of the disposable was reusable washable nursing pads. Super helpful. They're much thicker. I didn't have to constantly buy more. And while I was waking up soaking wet, this might sound weird. There were a few times those first couple of weeks that I woke up and I felt like I smelled like metal, like a metallic smell. And it's possible that I had high lipase. Now, high lipase is just a naturally occurring enzyme in breast milk that breaks down fatty acids, and the smell comes from oxidation. I don't think it's a problem or anything, especially since I was feeding at the breast, but I do know that if you do have high lipase and you freeze your milk, that can be a little bit of an issue for the taste of the milk once you thaw it. I've seen people describe the taste as metallic, soapy, or even fishy. One thing that I read that can help that is if you freeze it as soon as possible from pumping so that it doesn't have time to oxidize. I don't know if that would work, but I did see that as a very frequent suggestion. But overall, that smell kind of went away from me after those first few weeks. Now, from all that sweating and leaking, the dehydration that you experience postpartum is like nothing I have ever experienced or even can put into words. It's not just like, oh, I'm parched. You are ravenous for water. My skin felt like elephant skin. My lips started cracking to the point of they were bleeding. But as important as it is to drink water while you're breastfeeding, it's also important to drink things with electrolytes. So I was drinking coconut water at the time, and then I was also making sure to use the Redmond's real salt. I love that salt. You do need some salt. Salt retains water, and if you only drink a lot of water, you're just going to be peeing it out and further dehydrating yourself. So you need to find that balance. But to really keep up and regulate your supply, you need to be hydrated. And now let's not forget about those precious nipples that go through quite the journey when your baby just starts breastfeeding. It's really important to take care of them. They really can get super sore. So what really helped me was a nipple butter. I will link it down below. I forgot, I think it's from Mother Earth. I don't remember exactly the brand, but it's amazing. The ingredients are incredible, and you technically don't have to wipe it off before you nurse. I did wipe it just in case, just so there wasn't anything extra, but it helped a lot. And then once I finished that bottle out, I was fine for a while. A couple months later, I started to get sore again. I'm not entirely sure why. She might have been getting stronger probably, but I decided to finally order silverettes. Now, I read about them while I was pregnant and they just looked too good to be true. They were a little pricey for something that possibly wasn't going to work in my opinion, but I was desperate. I didn't really want to use an oil anymore. I wanted something that I could just easily take off. But let me tell you, they work so well, so well. I guess silver really does have an effect, and I'm so happy I got them. Kind of wish I got them sooner. But also with the nipple butter, 2 birds, 1 stone. The cracked lips that I had from dehydration, I did a lot of research to find a really clean lip balm. And then I was like, why not just use the oil that I already have? And it worked wonders. I was like, if it could work for my nipples, why can't it work for my lips? As I've mentioned multiple times throughout this video, breastfeeding is a supply and demand process. I know there are medical situations where you are an undersupplier, possibly even an oversupplier, but I don't think those are as common as it's made out to be. Unfortunately, when a mom goes to a doctor, especially a first-time mom, and the doctor says that their baby is not gaining quickly enough, let's not forget that breastfed babies are not gaining as quickly as formula-fed babies, and that doctor will then suggest that the mom supplements formula with breast milk, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you are trying to exclusively breastfeed, that's where an issue can arise. If you supplement with formula, you are latching baby less, baby's getting more full from formula, and then it's just kind of a vicious cycle of you actually producing less. The less you latch baby, the less your body will produce. I'm also convinced that if I was to pump, I would have become an oversupplier, specifically because I had a really heavy letdown. Baby girl spit up a lot without any other issues. Usually breastfed babies only eat as much as they need. So because of those reasons, I think that if I was to pump, I would have been an oversupplier. Now, when it comes to foods helping production, I'm not sure I'm convinced that actual foods can help. I think a well-rounded diet will definitely help. I have heard people saying that oats can help them. Anything with soy less than can help. Produce more milk. I did not do either of those. My understanding, your body will always make what your baby needs, but you might suffer. And this became very clear to me as I continued to breastfeed, and I would wake up just ravenously hungry to the point of me feeling faint, but I would still be producing enough for my baby. I would just need to make sure that I'm eating enough for my own sake. And I made sure to be really careful with what I was eating. I stuck to what I was eating throughout my pregnancy, which is a lot of animal foods, lots of red meat, avocado, butter, sourdough bread is a big one for me. But breastfeeding hunger is real, and I wanted to make sure that I was eating satiating, nourishing foods so that I wouldn't be grabbing other foods to fill that void of hunger. And I was surprised to find what kind of foods you can't eat while breastfeeding. Not that you can't, but might cause digestional distress in your baby. And the most surprising was cucumber. Not that I was a big cucumber eater, but I was really surprised at that. Sometimes if you eat dairy, that can affect your baby. I made sure to not eat spicy foods because that can affect baby. Pretty much anything that might cause you any mild discomfort might affect the baby. I also decided not to start drinking coffee after I gave birth. I was drinking coffee every single day, and then I just didn't. And I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't for when I'm breastfeeding, just so that she's not getting a caffeine boost or anything like that. And I did so much research on different like mushroom coffees or just different drinks to replace it, and I really just wanted to go to decaf. But anytime I had decaf in the past, I would bloat really badly, and that's just from how the decaf beans are processed, usually processed in chemicals. So I was lucky enough to find a process of, it's called Swiss water decaffeination, and I found a company, Purity, that not only do they use the Swiss water process for decaf coffee, but they're just super clean coffee, mold free, all this stuff. And for me, coffee was never really about the caffeine, it was the experience. I love waking up and having a hot cup of coffee or a cold cup of coffee. It was really about the experience, and I'm happy that I found this brand because now I can drink coffee and not get jitters at all. I do not have jitters, I do not have a midday crash. I was also taking Mama's Magic Milk Boost pretty consistently. I'm not sure if it had an effect. I had 2 bottles that I got from my registry. So now these things really surprised me and that I had no idea existed. And that is milk blebs. Now, milk blebs are on your nipples. I thought it was just a regular blister, but they're called blebs. And supposedly if you were to prick it, milk would actually come out of it. So it's kind of like a clogged duct situation. I definitely never pricked it. It just went away eventually by itself. I had clogged ducts maybe once or twice. I made sure not to pump because of the whole supply and demand thing, and I would just massage it, and eventually it just came out. Those can be pretty painful, and I just made sure to massage it as often as possible because mastitis is a real fear of mine, as I'm sure it is for many people. That's no joke, and I was terrified of having that, so just try to do as much manual stuff as possible. Now when it comes to breastfeeding positions, in the beginning I was not able to actually even use my nursing pillow. I couldn't sit for about 4 to 6 weeks post-birth, so I just used my regular pillow, kind of laying somehow. And I also used the C-curl, which is you're pretty much laying belly to belly to your baby. I know there's the football hold that you can do for breastfeeding, wallow hold, but I don't think that's really for newborns. But the football hold, I was so weak in the beginning, there was no way that I can hold my almost 9-pound newborn at the time. The ones I mentioned was just what I stuck to. Now, supply regulation is supposed to happen around 12 weeks. I have no idea to this day what that means. I have no idea if I'm even regulated right now. I thought you were supposed to stop leaking completely. I do still leak from time to time. Like if I'm laying on my breast or if I'm holding her on a side of the breast that's still full, milk will be pushed out. I don't know if that's considered leaking, but I'm not engorged anymore, but I definitely feel full very often. So they do say it's important to feed as much as possible those first 12 weeks to regulate your supply. At 6 months, I can't confidently say that I'm even regulated yet. So it has been 6 straight months of only breastfeeding, only nursing at the breast, no bottles, and it thankfully has gotten so much better. I had a pretty rough go around postpartum, so I'm sure that contributed to how I was feeling about things like breastfeeding. There were times where I was ready to quit. There were times where I'm like, why am I doing this? Breastfeeding can be exhausting physically, emotionally, mentally, but I know this is what is best for my baby. I'm so grateful that I'm able to do this, to provide for her in this way. Being the sole feeder of your baby is very tiring, but it is so incredibly rewarding. And I love that we have this bond. Like, I really truly have grown to be obsessed with breastfeeding, and I don't plan on stopping just yet. It really is as magical as I had hoped it would be. It wasn't in the beginning, I'm not gonna lie, it was not like that in the beginning, but I think that was just the postpartum mixed in with the breastfeeding and the hormones and the sleep deprivation, but I love it now, I really do. So we will be starting solids soon. Milk, of course, will still be her primary nutrition until at least a year. But yeah, we're entering a whole new phase of her growth and development, and I'm really excited. It's kind of bittersweet, and I'll talk more about that, but it's a big step. And I'm also excited to see how long we actually end up breastfeeding. But I would love to hear about your breastfeeding journey. No matter how long or short it was, every journey is beautiful. Every feeding journey with your baby is beautiful. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for watching.